if I may say so. So we are actually looking forward to a very, very interesting discussion with Dr. Batra today, with the chair of our publishing committee, Mr. Ratnesh Shah. And as many of you would be aware that under the program Roz Ek Nayi Kahaani, we have very interesting conversations with some of the authors, some of the noted personalities. And today it's our privilege and honor to have Dr. Mukesh Batra with us, who has recently come out with his book, The Nation's Homeopath. So I'm sure, like me, most of our viewers who are watching us on YouTube would be looking forward to this very exciting conversation. And without much ado, I would request our chair, Mr. Ratnesh Jha, to start the conversation. Over to you, Ratnesh, and thank you so very much, Dr. Batra, for finding time for us. Ratnesh.
Thank you, Sumit.
Thank you, Sumit. It's an absolute pleasure, Dr. Batra, to welcome you for this session today. I think we've started with some discussion, and I think just before the session started, I think I would like to take the first set of our discussion from there. You did correct me to say it's a mixopath, as in your career has been, and you also mentioned that the book itself was a challenge because you needed to have an autobiography. As also, it has an element of business. Would you be able to tell us about both your sort of that? How did you sort of start, and plus what the sort of notion of the book, conceiving when you conceived just before the corona?
So thank you very much, Ratnesh. Thank you for this opportunity, and thanks Shivendra as well for this opportunity. My father was a homeopathic doctor and my mother was an allopathic one. So I was actually born out of allopathy and homeopathy, and therefore I coined this word mixopathy. I must admit that I wanted to end my first chapter on an interesting note. And I've had lots of people calling me and, repeating and saying, oh my God, whenever you are a mixopath. So, it's almost like saying that, I've coined also this word. You have vegetarians and you have non-vegetarians. And then you have people who are in between who are called mockatarians. So, they eat according to the mocka, kiske saath baithe hain, uske saath fir veg khaye, uske saath non-veg khaye. So I say they are mockatarians. So like that, I coined this word mixopathy and I was born as a mixopath. And I actually believe people called me up to tell me, we just love the way your first chapter ended with that word.
Right.
And well, on a more serious note, I think also, I've been offered to write a biography by a few publishers. And when I wrote the first, chapters, and they asked me to send them, disconnected chapters as sample chapters, the feedback that I got from two of the leading publishing houses was that in India, people don't read biographies unless you're a film star or unless you kiss and tell. Yeah. And I had not kissed and I didn't want to tell. So I was very clear that I really wanted a biography at the same time. So I didn't want to write a management book. I'm saying if I wanted to do a management book, then I could have, they were only interested in saying, no, please write a management book. Tell us how you built your brand. And, I'm saying it's not an educational book. I was turning 70 and I wanted to tell the rest of the world my life so that they could benefit from my failures and from the lessons that I learned, so that they don't make the same mistakes that I made, So I had to, even there, I had to kind of practice a kind of a mixopathy between a life autobiography and a business autobiography. And I'm very happy to say that with my team of writers and narrators, we managed to actually do this extremely well, where we were able to flow one into the other. Also, I strongly believe that whatever we are today also depends on our childhood and depends on the value system that we build as children and as young people. And I think we carry them out into our adult life. So I think it's very important also to understand how do we live our life as children, because a lot of those values, those images, they live with us. And then they are part of our life, and then they, come out in our business as well. They also affect our business decisions. So it was very important, I thought, to tell the story right from the beginning till now. And I think that's what I've attempted to do, and I hope you like it.
Dr. Batra, I must tell you personally, for me, it was very captivating. I picked up the book and every story was flowing very, very smoothly from one to the other. And it was just sort of kept me completely inside. Talking about your childhood. I also tried to look at when I was looking at it, I was also looking at today at the Instagram, generation, where I said that everything has to be less than 1 minute. So I tried to make sure that every chapter was an incident from which one could learn from life's lessons, and also that it was never more than 3-4 pages, by and large. Yeah.
So it was very brief, and then one story led to another story, and that's how I kind of conceptualized my book. And also I try to also make it very visual as an author.
Sure.
So it also takes you between time zones. It takes you between what Agra and Lucknow were during the time when I was there, and then what Bombay was when I came, and what Mumbai is today.
Sure.
So that was also the kind of thought that I had while writing the book.
Yeah. So, I think it's exactly the way it has come in, the way every time has actually been lived. It's been told exactly the same way in the book. And see, if I'm a character immersed, I would actually experience those time. Talking about a childhood, Dr. Batra, you mentioned very fondly about these two different cities, Agra and Lucknow, and you kind of mentioned about travel by the train between these two cities. And you also very fondly talk about your grandparents, the Papaji, and that favorite dog of yours. And these characters actually come to life through the book. If you sort of reading the first few chapters, what do you when was the last time you traveled between Lucknow and, if I may ask you, Lucknow and Agra?
Maybe 60 years ago. So it's been a long time.
Right. So what do you
I have done train travels, but I haven't traveled between Lucknow and Agra by train.
Right. What do you make out now sitting here today, over the time which you lived with the very, very fondly remember characters like your grandfather and some of what you see, kind of lived the value at that point in time? What do you see then? And you were mentioning that you took your children there to actually spend some time. What is happening, between then and now, and what is the kind of experience would you be able to, sort of share?
So, physically and situationally, nothing had changed. Right. When I went to Agra and took my kids there, they were so amused to find that, the same tree was still there outside my koti. The bicycle shop was still there. The pan wala was still there. The chai ki dukan was still there. Nothing had changed. Maybe the road had become a little broader, but I think values changed. I think people changed. I think it became a more progressive city over the years. Like I said, my school was a co-ed school. When I went there, St. Anthony's became a girls' school, and my kids were very, amused to find that their father went into a girls' school, and it is a product of a girls' school. Because my parents used to live in Lucknow and my grandfathers and my grandmother lived in Agra, it was very common for me to take a train, overnight train it was. I remember it used to stop at Tundla Junction, and they used to change the bogies at the kind of the engine at that time. And then it used to connect and then go again. And next morning you were there in Agra or Lucknow. I mean, both ways. And I remember that, you had these old compartments, the way you saw in films. I don't know if you can imagine them in the old films of the 60s and 70s. There were no corridors to it. Each first class compartment was a bogie by itself.
Right.
And it had only 4 berths. Yes. And then it had a little toilet on the side. Yes. And you were actually pushed into that. And most of the time, it was an old homeopath who was 82 years old, who used to go to Lucknow for work from Agra. Right. Then my parents would say, why don't you just take care of my child and bring him there? I maybe have been 3 years old. Right. So I actually believe that I missed out on the fun of childhood in that sense. And the joy of travel with families, where you open your dabba, when you have your aloo ka parathas and you have your achar, and then you play fun games with your siblings. I was all alone, And unfortunately, sometimes if it was an old person, then instead of that person looking after me, I was looking after that person.
Right.
And then my parents would come and receive me, and then I would, be taken back home. And the same thing would happen in reverse. When I would come back, my mother or father would come to the station and then say, can you please look after my child? And I remember a very traumatic experience where my mother got onto the train and the train moved, and she was desperately trying to pull the chain. Whenever we need to stop the train, it never works. So it just didn't work. And then I don't know how much money she had on her. And then she went to the next station, and then she took a taxi and went back home. It was a very traumatic experience, which still has stayed with me. For me, that showed the helplessness of life. Right. You may be anybody. My mother was a doctor. She was the deputy director of health services. But when she was caught in this compartment and the train started moving and she tried to stop it, life has no stops.
Right.
It just goes on. So that's the lesson that has stayed with me. It has been partly traumatic as well, but it's also visual. And it kind of made me believe that there are no stops in life. And no matter what you do, chalti ka naam gaadi, you can't stop it. So you might as well go with the flow, and not get worried about whatever little bumps and things that happen on the way. Similarly, my grandfather was a man of substance, if I may use that word. He was very straight, very, very straightforward, very honest person. And he was also a strict disciplinarian. So, we all had to be packed off to bed at 8 o'clock. We were not allowed to watch movies unless they were the 10 commandments or something like that.
Right.
That also we had to go with a cousin to see, because movies were considered to be, damaging for children. And children, I'm saying, even when we were 10, 12 years old, we're not allowed to watch movies. Movies are a very bad effect. It's not for good people to see. That was the kind of thought, in Agra. So my grandfather was a strict discipline. We were very scared of him. And he never shouted at me ever. But one look of his face, and I knew that I had to behave myself.
Right.
So I think the discipline of life came from my grandfather. And I carried that all through my life, whether it was in my work, whether it was in my exercises, in my health, whatever it was. I also believe it helped me as a doctor, because a doctor, you also have to have a disciplined life, but you also have to encourage and imbibe discipline in your patients. Today, one of the biggest problems is patient compliance. People come to you, they take a prescription, they throw it out, they don't take it. They don't follow your instructions. So if you can't motivate a patient to follow your instructions, you can't discipline a patient, the patient is never going to get well. So discipline is a very important and integral part of an entrepreneur's life and of a person's life. And I learned that in my childhood, and I carried this forward. Similarly, because I was a lonely child and I was living alone, my companion was my Cocker Spaniel, who, for want of anything else, because he was black, was called Kalu. As simple as that. We never spent time in choosing names. My parents least of all. So I was called Mukesh. My younger brother was called Rakesh. And when the last one was born, next one was born, he was called Navkesh because he was newborn. So it was new, Navkesh. So nobody really spent time the way we spend going into, historical books and finding out what is the meaning of each name and how should our children be called. I mean, we never thought about that at that time. So my pet dog was my companion. And, it was like being brought up with that person. And one of the times, because he was getting old, and some neighbors said that, he may have rabies, which he never had at all. And I came back from school and I found that he was shot with an air gun. And that's a kind of a thought and a memory of his mangled body that still haunts me till today, But I remember the good things. What I remember is that for us, joy and happiness was a hug from my grandfather. And it was the lick of my dog Kalu. We did not need expensive toys. We did not need people around us. We didn't need anything. We had no internet. We had no movies. We had no television. We had nothing else, but we were so happy. It was such a happy childhood in spite of not having parents around you. If you played with your dog and your dog licked you, your day was made. Right. If your grandfather hugged you or your grandmother gave you a hug or just smiled and said, Shabas beta, bahut acha hai, aaj bahut acha kiya, you felt at the top of the world. And I think that's the background that we were brought about. Today, I think the world has changed.
Right. So, Dr. Batra, you actually describing such an intense set of aspect of the relationship. You're talking about grandparents, you're talking your love with your pet, how close you were and how bad you felt when some, sad news were shared with you. You talked about your two brothers, who, happened to have a name given to them with a circumstantial set of reason, but nevertheless they were very, very fond memories.
And it had to rhyme. It had to rhyme so that there is
it had to rhyme,
to calling the three kids.
Right. So Mukesh and Ratnesh also rhymes, just so you know. I mean, I think it is.
That's right. Welcome to the family.
So I think what is your what has really been your you did briefly mention about the relationship now in a contemporary time, and I think you have very loving two children and you have your own set of family. What's changed, and has that change really made any impact the way you see the life is?
Well, certainly it has changed. According to me, really relationship is about trust and care. Right. It's about communication. It's about making sure that you can talk to somebody every day about day-to-day issues, and somebody who's there to cover your back in case you ever need it. I think that's, according to me, is really sharing and caring is the essence of a good relationship. I also, believe that just like how one grows businesses, so also one needs to grow relationships. According to the latest study done by Harvard University, where I went when I was 60 years old, and one of the eldest students over there, one of the oldest students there, to do a course on medical excellence in Harvard. One of the studies that they did said that the people who were the happiest were people who had the best relationships. So, there's a direct relationship between relationships and happiness. So the kind of friends that you keep, how do you hold them? But I also believe that just like how in business also, relationships also take time to nurture. So you have to invest in them. And therefore, you have to put time and effort to keep a relationship going. Otherwise, it breaks. And this is something today, time is of great value. People don't have time they have time for their work, they have time for their business, they have time to make money, they have time maybe to look after themselves and to stay fit. Not really, but some of them do. But they don't have time to build relationships. And building relationships is an effort. It takes time. It's like a project. You need to do it all the time. You need to reinforce it from time to time to continue the loving and care.
So I think that's very well put. Also share with us that when you sort of moved from Agra to Mumbai and your schooling and you very sort of in a very humble manner, you've kind of mentioned few experiences there in the school, saying that you were part of the debating team, you led the debating team, you've had some of your seniors and juniors who really had different names in different places today, famous politicians or the actors, and school at the hub of things which are happening. Let's just say in Mumbai, that was a school. Even today, I mean, children from that school, I'm in the education space, I know that how important that school is. And I think you did talk about a full circle of living a school life within that school with every aspect of it. Would you like to share with us, how was it at Campions? I mean, how did you really sort of...
So honestly, Ratnesh, that was not very easy at all.
Yeah.
Transferring and moving from a school in UP to a school in Bombay, as it was called at that time, was really a great cultural shock. Understand that I used to think in Hindi and speak in English.
Right.
Being a guy from a small town and coming into Mumbai. Also, I had a very, very simple background, and here I was with all these, high-flying families used to come in big cars, and I used to still take a school bus and sometimes share somebody else's car, like walk to the next house, the next home, a kilometer away, so that I could take a free ride in their car. And if I was late for a minute, nobody waited for me. The car just went,
right.
So I lived that life, and I learned from it, and in school to ISRO, because that is where I first experienced the flying machines. Our teachers would throw dusters and chalks at us with great precision. They actually would make sure that you got connected, and you got hit. So, as the saying said, spare the rod and spoil the child was the maxim of the day. Today, of course, and I dare say that it reformed you. Today, the methods of teaching are soft, and I think students have very scant respect for their teachers. So I think the whole system has changed now. And of course, what I learned, as Rahim Ka Duas in the 3rd standard, when I came here, I was taught that in the 7th standard. So I was, a few years ahead in Hindi and Sanskrit, but I was way behind in English. And therefore, to improve my English, I actually started reading Shakespeare and all the books. I had studied the entire collected works of William Shakespeare. And I knew it by heart. I knew all the soliloquies by heart, because that was the best way to learn at that time. I mean, there was no method that you could actually learn. And of course, you picked up diction and you picked up accents from your colleagues around you. So over a period of time, you also took part in debates, and then you got better.
Sure. So while the sort of difference of the language, the literature, the subject of instruction or the medium of instruction changed from one city to the other, you very fondly talked about the moral values, moral science, the fact that the teachers had certain privilege, which essentially made students behave in a certain way, and also in a discipline in terms of doing what needed to be done. And I think you did mention about that was not only true for one, it was whichever class you were, you had to fall in line and you had to sort of behave in a similar way. What is your message, Dr. Batra, now that you have lived through the whole life, you see the generation you lived, now the current generation, the fact that the government of India is very, very looking in terms of national education policy and trying to play between knowledge and skill. These whole value system, moral science, the teacher, the concept of guru. What is, in a contemporary time, what is your view about the way the education should be? It's a very broad question, but just a reflection.
So very categorically, according to me, education is not the way it should be. Education is not about knowledge. Today, you can get knowledge from the internet. You have Dr. Google to tell you all your problems. Patients come to us and then say, but I read in Google, this is my problem. This is my diagnosis. So today, information is there for everybody to see. And therefore, the role of a teacher is not really to impart information or knowledge. The role of the teacher is to impart values. And I think this is where we are lacking today. Today, the teacher is not respected. It's no longer, it's not seen as a calling the way it was during my time. Today it's a profession, not only a profession, but education is commercialized, like medicine is as well. So the values are different. You become a doctor to make money quickly. You become a teacher so that you can earn a lot of money in tuitions. It's not about developing children. During my time, which was actually not very long ago, don't believe the number of years
Sure.
in the 2 years that your age is, and not what you write in the book. But during my time, a teacher was a guru, and you had the guru Chela Parampara, and that's how we learned. They were also great examples. You could not find fault in a teacher because they were living ambassadors of morality. They didn't do anything wrong because they knew they were being watched. They didn't want to be a bad example to their kids. I remember that when I was in school, there was a brother who was assigned specially, who once in a year used to visit every home in the college, in the school, the entire school. His job was to visit and talk to the parents and to see whether the child was well adjusted or not. Similarly, I remember my Hindi teacher, Mr. Bhatia, years after we passed out, not just me, but all his students that he had taught, he would visit them in their houses just to see how they're doing. Now this kind of a thing is no longer there. The relationship building over years, the value, the pride that you take in your children to see how they've grown, we all stand on the shoulders of other people. And I think if I am what I am today, it's also because I'm standing on the shoulder of my teachers who imparted the education, who gave me a value system, who made me stand for what I believe in, which today, unfortunately, is not there.
Yeah, see, you graduated from the school and went to Jai Hind College, and there you actually had a mention about Professor Lahiri. I think that was the name, if I recall it right. And I think you talk very fondly about that, the fact that the relationship there. I think I quickly want you to reflect what that was in the college context, and then perhaps a very immediate question with your first experience with a gentleman called Ravi, with your for the hotel side where you wanted to experience the person adventure.
By the time you come back, okay, I think you're back now. So
yes,
there was a little break. So I got your question about the internet seems to be a little unstable. So I've got your question about Professor Lahiri and the different things at that time. So
sure.
That time, even in college, we had a great time. College was a fun college. I mean, suddenly we moved from 25 children in a class to 150 children in a class. Yeah. From being totally controlled in a closed environment to being totally free. And right. I dare say that we were all outstanding students because we were always standing outside the class. We were never really in the class. We were in the canteen or we were watching. I mean, I have a world record, I think, of watching old Indian Guru Dutt movies. I think I saw 32 films in 1 month, but it was always after the practicals because, practicals was something you couldn't replicate. So 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock, we attend the practicals, and after that, we were outstanding students. We had a great time.
Were you feeling liberated from a 10 commandments, sort of restricted life, Agra to suddenly all shows?
Totally. And also from a boys' school, suddenly to find so many beautiful girls around you. And it was really liberating and it was really fascinating, Yeah. And then, of course, even at that time, I must say that, the girls sat on a different bench and the boys sat on a different bench. Right. So that segregation was still there. But just nice to have so many girls in your class and, somebody else to talk to who was like, different from a boy, Yeah. So, yes, I believe that. So there was a lot of freedom. There was a lot of thing to engage. There was a lot of opportunity because also I was the magazine secretary and I was the class representative. I stood for elections over there. So there was a lot of freedom and there was also a lot of leadership capability we developed during those days. Yeah. And of course, education went on, as normal. And I think the professors also took a little extra interest. So there was this gentleman, Professor Lahiri, who knew hypnotism. So he would have a hypnotic show and he would make all the kids laugh on stage. But what he did was he actually used that hypnosis to make sure that children got into addiction. So you could go to him privately and he'd give you a free session and make sure that you got rid of your addiction or drinking or smoking. So
Right.
there were still, higher goals and higher values of professors during that time. Today, it's quite different.
See, what I loved in this book is that there was a sort of persona of, or the character of this book, who has a very middle class value system, coming from a very humble family, had a great value system in the childhood, comes and become a little bit of a naughtiness as he gets into Jai Hind and start experimenting, and then starts talking about diminishing return and marginal utility. What was that? What was that changing? Was that really the way it was supposed to be? What was happening then?
So it first happened academically, because as I've written in my book, the medical college, the exam was after 18 months. The first exam was after 18 months. So there was a gap. So after 6 months, and that was from Mumbai University. So after 6 months, I would go to Pune University and appear for an arts exam. So I've done my BA and graduated in that with honors in economics and in psychology. I also wanted to do psychology because I knew that the human mind, for homeopathy, particularly even for medicine, was very important.
Right.
So I self-taught myself. I self-read, and I was never good in maths, which is why I went into medicine, really, one of the reasons, And I didn't want, but so I studied economics, and one of the things that I learned there was marginal utility. They said if you have 2 toes, then the third one you may even vomit, And I then learned it in theory, and later on I learned it in life. I learned it in practice. I realized that if you spend too much of money in a particular project beyond a point, your ROI or return on investment comes down. So you need to make sure what is an optimum level. And similarly in life, whatever you do in terms of time, effort, money that you put in, you must put in just the right amount of effort, not overkill it, so that you get the right amount of value for the time and the money that you put in any relationship, any business, any entrepreneurship. So that's how I came out with this concept of.
Yeah, very interesting. You did mention, even in your beginning of experimenting with homeopathy, you started actually experimenting with Thuja. Was that which got further replaced by Dul Karma? That was the medicine.
Dalkamara, yeah. So Thuja was one medicine, yeah. And Dalkamara, not Dilkamara. I mean, it could be that as well, because it was during college days, was another medicine. So I have some very, very positive thoughts about this. The first thing is, the founder of homeopathy was an MD doctor, Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, also experimented himself. I'm saying he took cinchona bark and then he got malaria-like symptoms, and that's where he discovered homeopathy. Mahatma Gandhi had experiments of life and living. I think if you don't experiment, you don't learn anything. And the best person to learn is to experiment on yourself, not on others. Then you're doing it at somebody else's cost. And also then you're not experiencing it for yourself. So I was very happy I always believe that one should experiment, and life is a series of experiments, and some are successful and some fail. But if you're afraid to experiment, then you will not grow, either in your business or as a person. So experimentation is very, very important as a person, as a human being, and I think it evolves you over a period of time. So one should never be afraid of experimentation. I also learned in Harvard, one of the lessons that I learned was that in drug companies, pharma companies, they actually give failure parties, because it is better to fail early and then succeed later on, because billions of dollars are spent into researching one drug. And if that drug is wrong, I don't want to stick to it and then say at the end of 10 years, it didn't work. If I know it's not going to work, I might as well quit now and then celebrate it. So failures are also celebrated. Right. And India, unfortunately, failure has a stigma. We always believe that, oh, fail ho gaya, pass nahi hua, acha nahi hai ladka. But that's wrong. Because, I failed many times in my life, and today I'm standing where I am today. Yeah. So failure is a stepping stone to success. And I think we should not view it negatively. We must view it positively. And that's very important to have a mindset change as well, either as an entrepreneur or as a person in life. Don't get depressed by failure. Get over it. Move on.
Yeah. So experiment with truth. One of the things which is really what struck me when I was reading is about your and as I said in the beginning, Dr. Batra, that I was almost feeling that I am getting some of the case studies back in my MBA school. That was reminded in my classroom that you could possibly replay all of that. You talk about this whole clinical learning. You talk about that you could best learn by doing these experimentation. I think you're mentioning that as well. Unless you're not close to what is happening, you wouldn't be able to know. You need to know the life experience. And is that the kind of a learning pattern in your life that you learn by doing? Go inside and sort of experiment and do more of those clinical trials and make sure that you learn from that and put that as part of your,
So like I said, life is an experimentation, and it's a series of experiments. Some which succeed, some don't. So I think it's very important to follow the path of experimentation. It's very important that we follow the path of experimentation, and that we're open to new ideas, that we're open to trying out something new. Otherwise we'll be dead. Change is life. If you're static, it is death. We all know that. If your breathing stops, you're dead. Because you're breathing and because there's movement, which is why you're alive. So I think it's very, very important to understand that experimentation is very important. I also understood as a doctor, and I realized as a doctor, that there was a lot of difference between theory and practice. You have, for example, theoretical knowledge, which is academic. But when you actually see a patient, you hardly ever get a classical case of a particular thing. So it's always mixed. So which is why you need experience. And when I'm talking about learning from patients, I don't mean, doing human experiments. I'm just talking about learning at the bedside of patients. Because you interact with them, because you observe them, you therefore learn, and you then carry that knowledge to other people who can benefit. So it is not like, like how you do with lab animals. You're not subjecting them to drugs and then trying to see what is the reaction. That's not my idea of experimentation. My idea of experimentation is learning from the bedside of patients, observing them, and then carrying those learnings to other people so that they can benefit. And I've done that. All along.
See, this is not a question which coming from the sort of flow of the question. This is just coming out of a way of coming. Dr. Batra, today in India, many of, all parts of India today, the Dr. Batra as a name is equivalent to, sort of you looking at somebody who's curing you, or looking at somebody who's helping you, somebody who's actually dealing with health. It is synonymous to something, care, somebody who's, there for you. How does it feel for somebody who's as modest as you were in terms of your, childhood and your, bringing up, to come to a stage where, for a country such as India, which is so vast, 1 billion plus people, and in many parts of this country today, your name, your last name, there are many Batras here in this world, but Dr. Batra, the moment says, it talks about the real set of care and, health and, and also, of course, health. How does it feel? And how do you reflect back on that?
So, one thing, honestly, it feels good because, our byline in our company is healing people, changing lives. So we don't believe just in curing a patient or a patient getting rid of his problems, but we believe in something called HRQL, which is the health-related quality of life. So, for example, if a person has got a skin problem or has got psoriasis, for example, and that skin problem comes in between the interpersonal relationship between people. He's not able to get married, he can't get a job. But if we treat that person and he's able to get married and then have kids and start a family, that's something that is very satisfying. So, of course, I feel very happy. I also am very proud, and I also feel very grateful because, it would not have happened without the blessings of people, without the blessings of God. So I'm blessed to have been in a position. At the same time, it also puts in a lot of responsibility. So, when you have people looking up to you, and then, everybody wants to be cured. And I always say this as an example, a film star is as good or as bad as his last movie. Now, of course, this was before lockdown. So, that if the movie goes well, then the price goes up. If the movie flops, then the price comes down. Okay, this is how it is. And the film industry is very, very competitive. But I think more competitive than that is medicine. Because in medicine, you're only as good or as bad as your current patient. I mean, you don't care a damn whether you treated 500,000 people before me, but I must get all right. And therefore, if I'm not cured, then for me, you're a failure. And I've experienced that. When I set up my clinic in Bangalore, for example, or Mauritius or London, the first thing people ask me, okay, fine, you've seen a lot of patients in Bombay, but how many have you seen in my city? Whom have you cured in my city? So, it's always a challenge, and it's a lot of pressure, and it's a lot of responsibility to deliver all the time. So it's not very easy. I'm saying it's easy to, to get a name, but believe me, it's very, very difficult to live up to it.
Sure. So let's change the course, and I think let's get into a bit of a personal side of you, and see what can we get from there. So I think how much of what you're saying goes to a lady who's standing by with you through the journey, who's working hard in terms of boarding the buses, traveling long hours, next to her brother as a clinic. And you did mention that she was comfortable doing that because it was more stable there. And then in the same spirit, you talk about your personal side of city of Mumbai, looking at the other side of humanity, walking on to Dharavi and other slum areas where you actually actively engaged in terms of running many programs. Give us a little bit of spin on both in terms of your personal side. We would love to hear that.
So when I got married, I was earning 150 rupees a month. And I used to take 3 buses to go to a charitable clinic just to earn that money. And my wife, who was also a doctor, was earning around 2,000 rupees a month. So for the first many years, I lived off her income. And if she was not there to support me, I would not be where I am today. So I'm very grateful to her for having held my hand in the difficult periods, because, maybe my father-in-law would even say that, why would you marry such a person, who's just not got a stable income, even though he's a doctor. But it allowed me to experiment. It allowed me to take up charitable places. It allowed me to reach to people. It allowed me to make homeopathy popular because I had that backing. I remember we used to get up at 4 in the morning to share 1 cup of coffee because we couldn't afford a servant for 100 rupees at that time, And then, of course, she used to come back and then cook and then wash the dishes together. So it was a difficult time. And if it was not for that support, the fundamental grounding would not have been strong. And then from there, of course, I built and I grew. So that's the one part of it. I think I also believe one of the big influences in my life, and if I may say so, is not just the men in my life, but also the women in my life. My grandmother was very pious, and so I got a spirituality from her. I used to sit in a lap and go to all the satsangs and listen to all the bhajans at least once a week. And my only takeovers there was just to get prasad at the end. But I sat through the entire thing. So a little bit of spirituality, a little bit of I would say, Atmanirbhar, not in terms of the way the government is saying it, but being Atmanirbhar means being self-contained and being contentment and being happy by yourself, within yourself, was something that I learned from my grandmother. Similarly, from my mother, she was very, very generous. She gave up her practice, allopathic practice, to support my father. She was in charge of a charitable clinic of Swami Chinmayananda. She would change 2 buses to go to Chembur every day. Even though she had cancer, she continued doing charity work. She was in charge of a diagnostic center. So there were very strong values that I learned from the women in my life, And my mother used to say this. She used to tell me as a kid, I remember it very well. And if you permit me, I just like to quote it here.
Sure.
Life is an echo, all comes back. Life is an echo, all comes back. The good, the false, the true. So give the world the best you have, and the best will come back to you. So everything that you throw out in the universe comes back to you. It all goes around. And therefore, I learned that, as a doctor, what are we trying to do? We're trying to improve the quality of human life. It's not always necessary that we have to improve the quality of human life through medicines. Medicines is one way, but there are many other ways. You can improve lives by giving and sharing your time, your talent, or your money, with the less fortunate. And that can not only make for a happier world, but it can also make you happy as well. I remember this quote. I walked and complained that I had no shoes. I walked and complained that I had no shoes till I came across a man who had no feet. And truly, there's so much that needs to be done to make someone walk again. And which is why when I turned 50, I started the Dr. Batra's Foundation. And we are now running over 173 free clinics on the first Wednesday of every month, all across the country. We treat thousands of patients lifelong free of charge. We are associated with NGOs like the Visually Challenged. I use my talent as well of photography and singing to give back to society for an old age home and for a visually challenged, organization. So I think all of us have some talent. And I think all we should do is, could we use our talent? Your talent could be writing, somebody's could be copywriting, somebody's could be, creative work. We can all contribute. If we use that for some good cause, we can actually have a happier world.
Oh, that's very well said, Dr. Batra. In fact, one of the things which are also was through the reading of the book, I could really see in the very early stage of your life, you had a liking for innovation and new thinking, and you did mention about the technology in the beginning. Perhaps one of those changing moments for you, that when you said that normal prescription was a process of going and referring to a fairly large set of book and trying to make the combination, but you kind of tried automating through a PC at that time, which was very clunky, very cumbersome. And why would you even think that could have actually given you perhaps spending that kind of money could have led you to think that it is just a waste, and perhaps could have taken you in a different direction? How did you muster the courage to say, okay, let's invest, this is going to give me something which is great as an output? And I think you did mention about the same with also later Sekhar suggesting something to do in the cyberspace, and you kind of picked that up from a journey in a plane and came back and started doing that.
Absolutely. So I think there's just one word for this, and that's a Hindi word, which is called junoon. So it's kind of a madness. So there's no explanation for madness. When you're crazy, you do crazy things. And when I started my first clinic, my first ownership clinic in 1982 at Chopati, I thought that I should modernize it. I thought it should be different from anything else. And so I worked for 1.5 years with 2 software engineers, and I prepared my own medical database. I'm very proud and happy to tell you that this was when computers were just coming into the country. People hadn't seen that. I'm also happy to let you know that the database that I prepared today, of course, it's been advanced and it's changed to an ERP module and lots of other things. A clinic management program which we built ourselves. It's not something which we bought off the shelf. But at that time, to invest in a computer, I remember it was, I used to call it, the green eye, evil eye, because you had to have a screen before it. I had a dot matrix printer, which was like the size of half the table. And I remember every time I took out a prescription, the whole building shook. It went tuck, 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 tuck. So everybody knew that I was prescribing. I think some income tax guy standing outside my room could count the number of prescriptions going, and then tax me for it. So it was fun, and it was also being futuristic. So I think, and let me also say this with great pride, that even today, when you research, you will find that 95% of hospitals across the world do not have a proper database for their patients. And even today, lots of people who die because of poor handwriting of doctors. When I used to write love letters to my wife, she had to go to a pharmacist to get it read, to a chemist to get it read. Chemists somehow can read a doctor's handwriting, but nobody else can. So a lot of errors happen in prescription. So having a computerized system for prescription did away with all of that. Other than that, of course, there are 98,000 permutational combinations for one case in homeopathy. So having a software which helped you to narrow them down to the top 10 was also very helpful. It gave far better patient results. And of course, I remember that when I started this, because my first computer cost me 1.5 lakh, and I had to borrow money at 36% per annum for that clinic, which was also the Bollywood rate, which was the riskiest business at that time. So mine, there was nobody calling you to say, can you please take loans? You had none of that. Even medicine was not recognized as an industry. So you 36%. You had to borrow privately, and you had to borrow from friends, you had to borrow from private banks, and it really 3% per month, 36% per annum. I had to pay through that for the next 10 years through my nose, But having said that, what was interesting was that it allowed me to differentiate. It allowed, my whole practice to become totally different. I mean, it was reported all over that it's the world's first computerized clinic in homeopathy. And that was a fact, And I think I've always believed in technology. I believe that if you use technology well, it actually can help you to grow. It's also a platform which is easily multipliable. Also, technology gives you scale. So you can't be everywhere. Like, just to give another example, during COVID time, in the first week, we had shock and awe because suddenly all our retail outlets had to shut down. But immediately we moved computer systems into doctors' homes with security data. And we had them within a week. We had about 1,000 e-consults happening every day for patients across India so that they could continue their treatment. So I think technology really helps you to scale up. It helps you to lower costs in the long run, even though to start with, it's very expensive. Also, on the flip side, technology gets outdated very fast. Sure. So every 5 years, you have to change computers, you have to change software, you have to keep upgrading it. But I still think it's worth it. And if you're really running an entrepreneurship, I think if you want to grow, then you must invest in technology.
So, Dr. Batra, actually, very, what was intriguing for me was some of what we talk about in 21st century skills, as we move into, the next set of era, is really what was getting personified. So you talked about this whole concept of junoon, or the passion, the resilience, the fact that, you could actually look at things in a very consistent manner. And I think while writing the book, you also very subtly mentioned about some of those business practices which you kind of felt came out of the experience itself. You were talking about, differentiating yourself. That's something businessman talks about, that I will differentiate myself. But it was coming very naturally to you, and you kind of putting a technology to differentiate yourself, which is really a double whammy. One was differentiating itself, and then putting technology on top of it. Then you talked about this whole branding. You give a, Harrod's example, saying how exactly that whole, the fact that positioning is really important. How do you talk about the out of box thinking? Was that a later realization, or was that happening in your life as you were actually moving with the fact that underlining, theme was the junoon of yours to do things?
I think it was part of the junoon. It was part of an entrepreneur's journey. It happened organically. It happened naturally. There was no, I've not been to any entrepreneurial school. I've not done any course. Okay, so all of it just comes naturally to me. I think a lot of it comes from introspection. A lot of it comes in observing other people and other companies, because a lot of my patients were top industrialists, and maybe I could share and learn from them something. But I understood that you need to differentiate, because everybody has a product. But there are so many homeopaths. There are 300,000 homeopaths in India, for example. But if you go to a Dr. Batra's, then your expectation of a brand is much higher. And a brand is not just about, it sets it apart, but it's not about the logo and the color. A brand is about the experience. And you got to make sure that the experience is continuous. And it's at every point of sale. Now that's a challenge. When you have 250 outlets across the world, how do you manage that? And how do you make sure that the brand experience is consistent and sustainable across multiple outlets? So a lot of it is training. A lot of it is getting the right people on board. A lot of it is process and systems, putting them in place, and then managing back end. I mean, we have, for example, on a mobile phone, we have something called an MI system, which all top management gets every patient, every minute live. All our clinics across the world are 24/7 network live. So we can get into a thing, we can see any patient data, we can see who has walked what, we can see what kind of treatment has been taken. We can close all our balance sheets on 31st of March every year, live, at the end of the financial year. So a lot of introspection, a lot of thought, a lot of process developing, and then over a period of time, then not having so much of dependence on people, and making sure that processes and things work independent. For example, supposing if you have a hair loss patient, one of the reasons for hair loss, 60% of women in major cities suffer from hair loss because of anemia. They are anemic. So if they're anemic, then we need to do a ferritin test, a blood test. Now the system is like this, that unless the doctor prescribes that test and enters it, it does not allow the doctor to go to the next field. So this is like an auto breaker.
Sure. And
this is making sure that the quality is maintained all through. Now there are many examples like this. It's very complicated, and it's time for another discussion on that. But sure, that's just to give an idea that when you have process driven, when you have technology, when you marry the two, when you have people right, I think you then build a strong brand, which sure, then at the experiential level also becomes strong. And that's what people remember. I mean, today there's nothing like customer satisfaction. Everything is about customer delight. I mean, if you can't delight the customer, if you can't make, I mean, our aim is to make every patient of ours an ambassador for Dr. Batra's. So if you visited Dr. Batra, you should actually be an ambassador. You should feel very happy and proud of the experience. You must talk about it, stand on the rooftop and shout it across your chimney to all the other rooftops around you. I'm saying that then is true customer delight. And that's what we aim for.
Sure. Where other you have answered the question, which is now on my screen by Mahesh Kumawat, saying, tell us the startup journey in the business, or what really worked for you. I think in the last sort of explaining, you kind of did touch upon that. I will combine this question with, as the last question from my side, and then we can go to the, audience to ask if they have a question. One of the things which I found is very interesting in the book is your mention about changing from Matru to Mehta House. There was you're writing it about saying how did it sort of liberated you in terms of thinking. Was that more of a constraint at that time in terms of the way the businesses can be managed, or was that more a very sort of decision of yours to say, I'm going to go into a place where I can operate it?
No. So much. Actually, again, it happened by accident. So Mathura Shish was a polyclinic. It was a rental clinic.
Right.
So because it was a rental clinic, I had only few hours. I had to pack all my patients at that time. So it was limiting time wise, you know.
Sure.
And after some years, when I was there and I'd set up a decent practice over there, the owner said his son is now becoming a doctor and therefore he needs the space. And because he said that, I moved out, and that then gave me an opportunity to buy my own place, of course, with a lot of loans at Mehta House, which was Chopati, which was my first ownership clinic. So the comparison really is not between Matru and Chopati or Mehta House. The comparison was between a polyclinic
Sure.
and my own clinic. So the trade-off was that because it was my own clinic, I had to pay through my nose EMIs,
Sure.
not
36%.
EMIs, but repay loans for next 10 years. My break-even in my practice, which was very good at that time, was 25,000 rupees at that time. But if I had to repay my loan, I had to earn 63,000 rupees. And my son, if I had to buy him a bottle of milk, I had to earn more than 63,000 rupees. So it required a lot of belief in yourself, you know, to actually believe that you can 3 times jump at a high level, you know, and make it happen. So Mehta House then had the pressure of money to kind of repay it and
Sure.
therefore to do well. It also gave me the time. So while money-wise it was a constraint, but time-wise it gave me the freedom, because in my own place I could sit there longer hours. I didn't have to worry about moving out, and so ultimately I could see more patients more comfortably and spend more time with them, and that was a big change.
Sure. No, I think also one of the things which we realized are that the whole idea of entrepreneurship at that time was not, sort of easy to take, because you had so much constraint. You're raising loan at 36%. You had, sort of a return itself was delayed. So I think all of that was a constraint, and within that, you could really manage to set up such a, successful and large scale. Now at a very large scale business. I would like to now go to audience if have any questions. I saw one. If there is any question, Sumit, you have any thing which you see as a question, or should I continue with?
I think you continue. There was a question which I think you already covered. There were a couple of questions which you already covered.
Sure. So I think I'll like to go back, Dr. Batra, to the last set of sentence of yours. And the quality which you were actually talking about, the fact that that you have to be invested, you have to be think 3 times of what you're actually doing as an entrepreneur today. Are those traits the same, or has that changed, or has that become easier? It is becoming tougher. What is your message for somebody who's actually today thinking about for the new generation who thinking about setting up a new business or starting new?
So my first belief, very honestly, is that you must believe in yourself, and you must put your money where your mouth is. You must put your money where your mouth is. I've always followed the Raj Kapoor model. What Raj Kapoor did was, if his film did well, he came out with another film. If the film flopped, he waited a few years. So a lot of my entrepreneurship has grown in the early years through internal accruals. I didn't have the thing of loans or having, I could go to sleep well in the night because I knew that I didn't owe any bank any money, and so on and so forth. So I think first of all is that you must believe in yourself. That's very important, because if you don't believe in yourself, nobody will believe in you. I'm saying in my early years, I never put in money in the stock market. I only put in money in my business, and I kept funding it. So I kept funding it all the time so that it could grow more and more, because I believed in myself. I knew that I could bring in more returns for myself than any other company would do for me. Because here I'm the owner, I'm sitting, I'm driving it. I'm in the driver's seat. There I'm dependent on somebody else. So the first thing, like I said, is have a passion, have a belief in yourself. The second thing is, whatever you do, to actually try to hold on to it as far as possible, stick to a value system. It's values which allow you to grow. It's values which hold you firm. If you start organizations in the idea of making quick money, or which is not value based, something will burst along the line. Something will not grow. So if you really want to grow, and you want to grow fundamentally strong, then you have to have a value system. So you want to make sure that you are able to charge or put that value system in the entire organization, right? All the level down, which is not very easy. It's always a challenge. And finally, I would say, just to answer your question on entrepreneurship, I think if you have proper doctors or proper people, and if you manage them well and you train them well, so if you select the right team and you have team building, and then they also follow your value system, then they have the same passion, I think the job is half done. So if you are able to inculcate value systems and training and growth in people and back it up with process and system, which is very important. So again, once the process and systems are in place, it's very, very difficult to break it. Not that it can't be broken, it can be broken, but it's difficult to break it. So as you go along, as you become bigger and as your processes and system become tighter and better, it becomes easier to manage. It's not such a challenge. But to start with, when you're managing only people, it's a big challenge.
I'm sure for our audience to get these sort of humble suggestions, Dr. Batra, are the ones who are invested very well. I'm sure people go to the business schools for all of these discussions. And just as the last question, Sumit, before you take over, I think this is important is going to my mind. We've heard, Dr. Batra, about your sort of journey so far. We've heard about your professional side. We've heard about the way your life happened. Who is Dr. Batra other than the work and all of what is really told? What's your space? What do you like doing? What's your fun? What's the definition of fun for you?
I mean, work is fun and fun is work. Right. That's how it is for me. I'm working all the time. I wake up dreaming work. I wake up sleeping work. Having said that, I also have a lot of interesting, hobbies. And I believe that once you grow at the top, you get lonely at the top. So it's always, I've seen all top people, they take up some kind of fine arts. Fine arts also makes you sensitive, because in medicine, we become insensitive over a period of time. Yeah. So yeah, seriously, because you see so much of pain, suffering, death, all around you, that to keep your sensitivity alive, I even tell all my doctors that you must take up fine arts, which is why I took up photography. I've had 51 exhibitions, including I was invited by the Western Australian government to shoot 60,000 wildflowers for them 2 years ago before COVID, and so on and so forth. And then I've had singing programs for 600 people live with a live orchestra, old songs for a good cause. So I enjoy doing it. My biography is probably my 6th book, and now I'm evolving in my new avatar as an author. Sure. I've already signed 5-6 other companies with other books to come out. I'm now booked for Jan 22 until Jan 23 as far as my writing is concerned. So I'm coming out with 5 more books. I've got contracts with other publishers now. So I think life gives you an opportunity, and it's just not business. It's just not work. It's also doing the thing that you love doing and that you enjoy doing. I think for me, every moment of life is worth living. I believe in living for the moment. And, before we close, I'd just like to hum 2 lines of a song, which I sing for my grandchildren, and this wish that I have for the world. It's a Kishore Kumar number. Chal ke tujhe main leke chalu ek aise gagan ke tale jahan gham bhi na ho aansu bhi na ho bas pyar hi pyar pale ek aise gagan ke tale ek aise gagan ke tale ek aise gagan ke tale. So on that wish that all of us stay healthy, stay happy, and stay blessed. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, Fiki. Thank you, Ratnesh. And thank you, Shivendra, for connecting us. God bless.
Such a delight talking to you, Dr. Batra. Many things have been spoken. I'm sure many we will speak over a cup of coffee as and when we meet up. Over to you, Sumit.
Yeah, what an experience that was. I mean, I'm completely mesmerized. I enjoyed every bit of it. Ratnesh, while you did mention that while you were reading the book, it reminded you of some of the case studies. In fact, I would say while I was listening to Dr. Batra, it reminded me of my B school days. So, so I'm not sure, Dr. Batra, if you already go to some of the business schools to deliver motivational lectures or lectures on entrepreneurship, but that is one thing which you can definitely look at. But let me tell you on a serious note, it was very, very motivating and very, very inspirational. And it's an honor, it's a privilege to have you with us. And I'm sure our audience would have definitely benefited out of it, and they would have also enjoyed the way we enjoyed. Thank you so very much for spending time with us, and have a great evening. We'll look forward to staying in connection with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity, and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.